Welcome to the Newman Show.
It's the Newman Show.
We're back for the last segment, for the last hour of the Newman Show. We are holding on to our dear shrinking violet, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, and we're joined by a great friend, former First Lady of Washington, D.C. She now heads up the Recreation Wish List Committee, which is responsible for a fabulous learning and tennis center in Southeast Washington that is making a great impact on the lives of children and families throughout Washington, D.C. Cora Berry, welcome to the Newman Show.
Glad to be here, Rock.
Very, very glad to have you. There is so much we want to talk about. I've jumped around with Julianne, and all of it has been very interesting in the last hour that she was here. You know, I think the first thing to do is to jump in here. I said it's been such an interesting news week. On Sunday, on Oprah Winfrey's network, there was the airing of Bill Duke's movie called Dark Girls, and there was an explosion of comments on Facebook, on Twitter, throughout social media. One person that I know, she's a 24-year-old, very light-skinned lady, and she said, "I'm just tired of hearing these dark women talk about their problems. Get over it." That's what she said. There were just comments across the spectrum. The part that I saw of the film really did depict, again, the name of the movie was Dark Girls, and it really did depict what I thought was a pretty depressing evaluation and sort of a complaint of having had to live a tough life as a result of the dark complexion of the skin. Most of them seemed to feel as if their dark skin was such an incredible burden. And one of the things I thought about when I was reading that, and that we would delve into this subject today, was to invite Cora, you on the phone, because you are of dark hue, and as I have known you for some 30 years, that has been something that you've worn as a badge of honor, as pride, as being, gleeful and understanding the true concept and the reality that black is beautiful. So I wanted to have both of you to comment on the subject matter, Bill Duke having done that movie, and how it continues today that colorism within the African American community continues to be an issue that many folks are uncomfortable with. Here at the Newman Show, we just don't have any sacred cows, and I want to deal with all of these issues.
Well, it's just unfortunate that it's still going on. E. Franklin Frazier dealt with that in his book. I think it was Race. It was a Race and Class.
The Black Bourgeoisie.
Black Bourgeoisie. And we could call it inverted racism. I never pay attention to it personally unless somebody brings it up. I don't pay attention to somebody being light. I don't pay attention to anybody being dark. For myself, it has not only been a badge of honor, but it has helped me a lot. I mean, I'm a beautiful black woman in every sense of the word, not just in terms of my heritage, but in terms of my skin.
Yep.
And I'm very proud of that. I try not to have any biases toward anybody who's lighter than me, but I definitely am very proud of it. And I'm very surprised and sad to hear that my sisters in, as you call it, the darker hue, are sad about that. I don't really understand it. I think it's something that was built into them when they were very young. I will say this, my conversion wasn't from birth. I grew up in Pasadena, California, where we were a minority of black people, no matter what hue. And I wasn't really aware of the color differentiation in terms of feeling insecure until I went to the South. And I went to the South to Texas Southern University, and that's when I ran into it. But lucky for me, Stokely Carmichael showed up at Texas Southern, had a big rally, and he talked for hours about everything in society that's bad that's called black. The bad guy wears black. The good guy is on a white horse. Yeah. Angel food cake, devil food cake. I mean, he just went down the list. It was just amazing because, you know, it's brainwashing, so you don't pay attention to it. You just buy into it. By the time he left that school, I was very clear that I was beautiful and black, and all that stuff they was doing in Texas wasn't relevant to me. But I'm very fortunate. I ran into Stokely early in my years. So I don't really have the answer to that. My best friend is sitting next to me, and you see her, and you see me, and, you know, she's real, what we used to call light-skinned, and I'm real, what they call dark-skinned, but that never comes up. Uh-huh. I mean, that just is not relevant, so I don't know. Maybe she can answer it from that viewpoint, speaking for the light-skinned people.
I'm speaking for the light-skinned people? But, you know, Rock, to me it is sad. But this is a vestige of the early 20th century, and now we're in the 21st century, and we still have some of this happen. Yeah. We had a cover, the Bell magazine. We did a cover with a whole array of young women from the very lightest to the very darkest. We were trying to battle the fact that some young people still have this in their head. Some young men still have it in their head that a light-skinned woman is preferable. Quite frankly, I always wanted to be darker. Because back in the day, you know, you weren't black enough if you weren't black enough. Right. Even though, you know, I'm about as left as anybody, and probably blacker than most in terms of
blacker than me.
But this has been ingrained. So I don't know how many times when I've lived in the South, you know, in North Carolina, one day someone said to me, "Well, just because you're light-skinned," and I'm like, "Excuse me?" And it went on to say, you think you can do anything you want to just because you're light-skinned. Right. So a lot of that is...
That there's a certain privilege that comes.
And a lot of that is ingrained, especially in the South. But what I find very troubling, Rock, I've got a few friends who are economists. Dr. Sandy Darity at Duke University is doing work on whether or not light-skinned people are paid more money than dark-skinned people. Yeah. Now, I think that's a weird kind of economic research, and he's such a brilliant brother. I'm like, there's so many other things you can do. But the fact is, just like that young sister in the Trayvon trial.
Yeah, which I want to bring into this conversation.
Very, very dark-skinned, clearly very smart. She speaks 4 languages. And I keep saying that because that gets lost in translation. I mean, I've heard our people and other people call her inarticulate, right. And any number of other things. Yeah. But I think sometimes white people are uncomfortable with some black people. And we don't have passing anymore, per se. We probably do. But there are some who are just more comfortable with lighter people until I open my mouth. And then they're like, uh-oh, we got a problem here. So the colorism is there. You need parents like a Cora Berry to tell their daughters. And the biggest problem to me is that lots of our young women, whether they're light or dark, don't think they're attractive. And because so many young women have grown up with no daddies in the house, see, a woman needs somebody to say, you are beautiful. You know, with your big nose, with your big lips, you're still beautiful. That's still beautiful, but you are beautiful. If men don't tell young women that, when they get to be 18, 19, and they need a hug, they don't know what a non-sexual hug is. Yeah. And therefore, they get involved in all kinds of stuff that they really do not want to get involved in. And the colorism certainly has something to do with it, but we have to, again, embrace our babies sooner rather than later.
You know, I want to share something. Something happened to me as a young boy, about 6 years old, and that was rather traumatic. It really crushed some innocence, and I've certainly told this story before, but I was shining the shoes. The baseball player that played for the Sandlot baseball team where I live, he was a very dark-skinned guy. He was the third baseman. He was my favorite guy on the team. And he came to my house on one Sunday morning and was getting ready to go to church and told me he would give me a quarter. Normally, I'd get a nickel or a dime for shining my brother's shoes or something like that. Well, he told me he'd give a quarter. I couldn't get on my knees fast enough to start hitting it, you know. I've always been entrepreneurial in nature. And when he left out of the house, my grandfather, light-skinned, old guy, told me that he would break my neck if he ever saw me shining that nigga's shoes again. Now, that was a terrible thing, and I was a rebellious child. So as a rebellious child, before I hadn't even been conscious of color, but as a rebellious child, you know, I really started to gravitate towards everything and everybody black. And all of my girlfriends were like the blackest girls in school, and I just loved them sisters. Well, fast forward 50 years. A couple of years ago, in a golf course community in Las Vegas, I was invited to a party. And the party was by this relatively wealthy, light-skinned husband and wife. And I was happy to go there. So I had some mutual friends that knew them. I went there. It was a Super Bowl party, as a matter of fact. I went there, and after I was there about 20 minutes and all the pleasantries were exchanged, highly educated couple, wealthy couple, I looked around, and everybody in there was very light-skinned. There wasn't a dark-skinned individual in that house, and I knew after a little bit of conversation that was intentional. Now, I had a sense of discomfort with that, but this is 2 years ago.
Wow. Well, but it still happens. I mean, and it's challenging, but again, if we believe that we are a black community, then we have to fight that kind of prejudice and, you know, perhaps call people on it. But, you know, the insults go both ways. I was telling you earlier, I'll never forget a brother calling me a urine-colored nigger. A urine. Now, they didn't say urine either. And that was like, to me, like being slapped in the face.
Right.
I stopped dating a brother who told me one day, I said, "What is it you like about me?" He said, "You're a red bow." I said, "Okay, I don't want to see you anymore. If that's the qualification for hanging with you, then you need to find another red bow."
And you know what I think that so speaks to is the continuing psychosis, the continuing residue of slavery and beyond. We'll come back and address all of that in a few moments after these brief messages on the Rock Newman Show.
Tim Pohanka from Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai. It's hard to be down on your luck when you're Virginia's first choice for new Nissan and Hyundais, but I need to sell 60 cars this week. Right now, I'll pay you big bucks for your good luck. Bring down any good luck charm you've gotten. Based on the sale price of the car you choose, I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car this week. Today, your lucky penny is worth plenty, up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car you want. Stop moping and hoping you'll get approved. With my For the People credit approval process, the banks are looking to get lucky and lend to you, even if you've been turned down before. Bring me any good luck charm and I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car today. Hurry, once I get rid of 60 cars, the luck runs out. All offers require bank approval, so call us at 1-800-POHANKA, visit Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai on Route 1 in Fredericksburg, or better yet, log on to TimPohankaForThePeople.com. And when we make a deal, I promise it'll be your lucky day. I'm Tim Pohanka, and I'm a leprechaun for the people.
Broadcast from Busboys and Ports, 14th and V Street. I just love the way that sounds. And when I include that we're broadcasting from the Langston Hughes room, I just love it more and more. I want to take my hat off to the proprietor, the founder, the owner, and his staff, Andy Shalal, who have created an environment here, as they say in their tribal statement, to uplift the consciousness of the community, sort of one conversation, one dinner, one breakfast at a time, and in an effort to make a positive impact on the world. This is a wonderful space. I encourage and suggest and recommend for everybody to come down. It's really a cool place, and they have some fabulous food, which in about, if I can do my math properly, it's 11:20 right now. The show is over at 12 o'clock. At 12:01, we're going to throw down up in here. Just want to let y'all know.
I can help you with the math.
Can you really?
That's an inside joke, because Cora has accomplished great things. She runs a multi-million-dollar empire and can't count.
No, Cora is definitely math challenged. But a brilliant. If you have not been to the Southeast Tennis and Learning Center, you must go. because of the work that she does with our kids. If you have not seen a performance of Blacks in Wax, I would have to call you culturally deficient.
Hello.
Because you see our young people learning how to, these were young people who had not had the challenge of memorization in school. And they will learn paragraphs about
and
all kinds of historical figures. And it's just amazing. I mean, it really, really is.
Julianne, you may or may not know, we've actually showcased some of the kids just prior to Blacks in Wax on this show here. We had Michelle Obama, we had Harriet Tubman, we had Barack Obama. I mean, it's and this is in case I haven't announced, this is unapologetically a DC-centric show. What we're looking to do from this table right here is talk about DC politics, DC culture, all things DC, and export it to the world, because this is the greatest city in the world.
You know, it really is, and you know, you said you were right back. No, we're right black. You know, you say right black on the Rock Newman show. But DC is a cultural, beyond a mecca. It really is who we are. Howard University, we're thinking about the people who walked through there. Ernest Everett Just, first African-American person to get a degree in biology. Just so many. Abram Harris, who was an economist here. I mean, the people who walked through those hallowed halls are part of our fabric. And so at Cora, did you teach there or you went there? You went there for your master's, I think. Howard.
Oh, I got my master's there. You know, the thing I love about Washington, D.C., because I am a political scientist and a political activist, is that all roads lead to D.C. And I go all over the world, and people talk about, well, I'm going here and I'm going there. I said, if you want anything done in the United States, I don't care if it's a national organization, sports team, or whatever, everything comes back here, either nationally or locally. All your national organizations have their office pretty much established in Washington, D.C. The politics is very interesting and very exciting, considering the fact that we have not had full representation in the District of Columbia yet, but what we do a lot with it. And so I love the politics of the city. I love the politics of going up on U Street and looking at the Reeves Center and knowing the history of that and how that got established, and the riots that we had for Martin Luther King. It's a very fabulous city. It is no longer Chocolate City. It is now Latte City, but nevertheless, it's still very interesting.
Kind of mocha cinnamon toast.
I call it chocolate chip, especially around this neighborhood. Where I've been in this neighborhood for 20 years, 19 years, and you've literally seen the change. But change is inevitable. The challenge is that people of African descent should not give D.C. up. We don't vote as much as we ought to vote. And if we don't vote as much as we ought to vote, we are likely to see a leadership change, a sea change in the leadership. Now, the blessing is that several melanin-deprived people have announced that they are running for mayor. So maybe they'll knock each other off, and we'll have yet another generation of African-American mayors.
Let me jump into, we talked about how exciting this week has been for a variety of reasons. Certainly the Supreme Court decisions that were rendered this week. And Cora, quite some time ago, I heard you give a presentation, and you talked about what was your admiration for Lyndon Baines Johnson. And that you thought that for the African American community, if I'm saying this, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that you thought that for the African American community, he was the best, most dynamic president that this country has had. And I bring that up in the context of voting rights and his efforts, his ability to persuade, his ability to twist arms and to get legislation across and passed that ultimately had a dramatically positive effect on black leaders, on black people being able to vote, and then politicians being able to be elected to office. So if you, as the political scientist, could kind of go back, 64, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and tell us about why your admiration and why you made that presentation in the way you did.
Well, Lyndon Baines Johnson was a very interesting person. He obviously was a Texan. And if any of you ever want to do a study on the the culture of America and you're an anthropological study, you should go and study Texas. It's a very interesting phenomenon. It's Mexicans and Africans and all of them. I did a longitudinal study. It's a unique state, I have to say that. Mm-hmm. The white people are unique, the Mexicans are unique, the black people are unique, and they have a unique relationship. And his coming up, he had a big farm, he was a racist. Everybody was in their place. He came to be president. Lots of things happened. And out of his words, not quoting but paraphrasing, God doesn't often give you a second chance to right the wrongs that you have created in your life. This is my second chance, and I'm going to do the best I can with it. So you had a president of the United States in the East Garden signing the 1965 Voting Rights Act, ending it with, and we shall overcome. Yeah. That hasn't happened since. Not even with the black president, and it never happened before. But he didn't just stop there. His war on poverty and all the different programs that he put out to not just give people an equal chance, but to right the wrongs of the past, which was very, revolutionary and very controversial. He had, oh my God, I mean, I'm a product of the war on poverty, the school, the college funds, and
Head Start.
Well, I am dating myself, but I taught in the first Head Start pilot program in California, which was to give young people, especially poor kids and African Americans at that time, black kids, a Head Start so that they could play catch up. And it was just so many poverty programs that, of course, got gutted when he left office and Nixon came in. But it was amazing the things that he did, and these were things from him. From his heart to try to right the wrongs, not only from himself, but for the country. So to look at the 1965 Voting Rights Act to be, again, gutted with the recent Supreme Court decision, I have a very good friend. He's gay. And he called me the morning after they passed the vote for gay right marriage. He said, so how am I supposed to react to this? He said, I'm supposed to celebrate on one hand,
a black gay friend.
Yeah, a black gay friend.
Right.
So he said, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
He said, so up with the gays and out with the blacks. He said, that shows you, and I agree with him, that the politics of this country definitely permeates the thought patterns of what happens on that Supreme Court. So, he said, it's bittersweet for me. He said, but quite frankly, as a gay man, I would reverse it. Because there are a whole bunch of problems out there. This person is from Texas. At the strike of the pen, the moment that was passed, Texas was able to go forward with their legislation to have voter ID and all of the things. Back in the day, at the risk of boring everybody, there was the poll tax and the literacy exam and the white primary and all of those things that were used to keep black folks from voting. Once the 15th Amendment was passed to give blacks the right to vote, everybody the right to vote. Now it's voter ID, it's limiting early voting, it's closing the polls early, it's all of these other things. It's just a modern day version of the poll tax and all of the other
and I'd like
what
both
they've
of you.
also done is they've closed precincts.
Yeah.
So in Mississippi, for example, in the last election, people had to travel as many as 75 miles to get to a polling place. Now, if we know from New Orleans that 35% of African Americans did not have cars, how are you going to get from point A to point B 70-some miles? And so there are lots of ways to basically limit the vote. And as I said earlier, Rock, you have public policy that looks race neutral, but it has a racial impact. And that's why the Voting Rights Act had to have you run things through the Justice Department.
Well, let me tell you, I'm happy about it. Now, I know everybody's going to look at me. I'm a child of the 60s. We hit the streets. This is going to be a catalyst. First of all, I noticed that as soon as it happened, we were ready. The Democratic Party's voter aspect of it, I forgot the name of it, headed by my friend Donna Brazile, immediately, they were waiting on it, sent out a fundraising and an activist mail out. So they're mobilizing, and I have told many people that the reason that Barack Obama has had the privilege of having a second term in office was because of the efforts for voter suppression.
Yes.
If it had not been for voter suppression, I doubt very seriously we'd be sitting here celebrating the second term of the first black president. But it was these blatant efforts to suppress the vote that incinerated and excited and really literally just pissed off a whole bunch of black people. And I can tell you stories and stories and stories. I can tell you stories of long lines in Ohio. I can tell you stories of my sisters who are running the voter what is Melanie's group?
Oh, the National Coalition for Black Civic Participation, yeah.
They're in contact with all of these people, sending people down to the lines with pizza, having them across the street playing music so people could be dancing in line.
So what I'd like for both of you to comment on is the climate in America today that is such that, we have to look at and acknowledge that there's tremendous progress from being in the streets in the 60s. So much has changed. Access has changed. Education has changed. The ability to be franchised has changed. What is it that is in the climate, that's in the water, that where you see the vitriol and the attitudes that seem to be going backwards, that seem to have a territorialism to say, to really want to take us back? First, when Obama became president, the cry was, I'll never forget that lady, but she represented so many. We want our country back.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you a funny story. I was my Pilates instructor in Greensboro. People always knew when I was there because I have a red car, and my car would be parked in front of the studio. But sometimes I walked. So after President Obama was elected, we ended up losing a black mayor in Greensboro. So I'm in the Pilates studio, and then I went to the restroom, and the person who came in after me said, well, where's your other client? I know she's upset that we don't have a black mayor. She said, but black people have everything. You have the president of the United States. You have the police chief was black. You have black police chief. And when the police chief was appointed, one of the sergeants said, we will never have another black police chief in Greensboro. So you saw the movement go, but this lady was apoplectic, and she really believed that black people had everything. So all I did was just flush the toilet and walked out and just looked at her and said, how you doing today? Which was code word for, you little racist you. But in any case, you really do see this movement back. Texas, just Tuesday, State Senator Whitney Davis stood on her feet for 11 hours. Yeah. They're trying to limit a woman's right to choose. Now, everybody does not necessarily, quote, like abortion. Then if you don't like it, don't have one. Right. And let the folks who need to have choice have choice. We see it with voting. 30 states or 24 states that have passed voter ID kinds of things?
30.
In North Carolina, if a student votes with their student, you're a citizen of D.C., but you change it because you're going to be at a college for 4 years. If they decide, and they haven't enforced it yet, but if they decide that you fraudulently voted, it's a $2,500 fine to you, a student. Now, how does a student pay a $2,500 fine? So the movement backwards, I really believe, began when President Obama was elected. Because I really believe that there are some people who just couldn't stand it. I mean, they literally could not stand it. And then when you add Mr. Romney, who, what did he say? Basically, women need to go back into the kitchen. Now, he didn't quite say it like that, but we really talked about a movement backwards with women. So the backward movement is, I think, the last gasp of the old guard.
I think the backward movement also was an effort to ensure that Obama wouldn't be reelected. And so some of the revolutionary voting laws, like early voting in the District of Columbia, now you have early voting, but also registration on site. Mm-hmm. That's very empowering. Yeah. And then in Florida, thanks to Chris, they had changed in terms of ex-felons being able to vote, right, which was really probably the end of his relationship with the Republican Party. I know from my brother being the mayor of Riviera Beach, Mayor Masters, that early voting was the key to the large turnout for Barack down there. Yeah. And so when you start and what they did down there is they changed it and limited it. So they went around the registrar and did some other things, but they had to keep fighting. But the bottom line is, I still believe that as long as they fight to get their country back, as they call it, once more, we're back to the 60s with a different twist. I think that's when African Americans and other minorities will rise up and fight against it. And I think that's a good thing, because there are other things on the table besides just voting. And we have to pay attention. If we're not paying attention, then a lot of things will go their way. So I think it's a blessing in disguise. And also, they talk about these pre-clearance states, which they're talking about the southern states, but some of the worst offenders of voting rights was in the north. It was Pennsylvania and Ohio. They're not even under the pre-clearance, and in New Jersey. Yeah. So that gives you an opportunity to start looking at realignment. They're talking about the new Texas. Yeah. All you got to do is wake up all the Mexicans and get them to vote.
And those are subjects I want to get in our next segment. We've got to take a break here, and we'll be back from the Langston Hughes Room at Busboys and Poets on the Rock Newman Show. This is a live show here, so you might have seen a little head just running across there. The tune you heard while we were in break, the last one there, was Duke Ellington, Washington, D.C.'s own Duke Ellington piano jazz. And as I said in the last segment, this is unapologetically a D.C.-centric show. And part of what we do, we showcase part of D.C. and its music, from Duke Ellington to Chuck Brown to Johnny Gill and to Stacey Lattisaw and to many, many more.
Marvin Gaye.
Marvin Gaye is the theme. The theme music for the show is Marvin Gaye's great album, What's Going On. We were talking about legislatures changing laws and amongst other things. And what I want to have both of you seasoned ladies to opine on is your observation of white America today that it is more biased, prejudiced, and racist than it was 20 years ago?
No, that's not my observation. I think it's generational. I think there's a young generation of people in these colleges, and a lot of these young people, they don't seem to see color nor sex. It's amazing. I'm just amazed at it. I mean, homosexuality, as we call it, is just normal for them. If you look at the biracial marriages, the interracial marriages, they're very, I mean, everybody's marrying everybody.
Amongst the youngest.
The youngest generation. Mm-hmm. The generation that we are in, they're just on their custard last stand. You know, they don't want to go out like this.
And when you say that we are in, because what you're talking about is elected politicians, by and large, are more 40, 50, 60, 70 years old.
But I do think it's generational.
Okay.
I agree. You know what? I wrote a book with a young woman who used to work for me, Regina Green, in my book, The Paradox of Loyalty, an African-American Response to the War on Terrorism. And one of the observations I make in the book is that I see race first, or maybe second. She sees it like sixth, or maybe seventh. So when you look at things...
And what's her ethnic makeup?
She's African-American.
Okay.
She's married to a Jewish guy.
And how old is she?
She's like 30.
Uh-huh.
And she's married to a Jewish guy. They have a couple kids. And so to her, race was literally almost last. I mean, in fact, it's funny, once her...
So perhaps, I mean, and the sense is that you really believe her when she says that. And I bring that up because you know how many times we hear, particularly Caucasians, say, well, I'm colorblind. And I've always had an issue with that.
But those are older people, too.
Because that's denying.
Yeah, that's
denying a whole lot when you say that. And no one really is.
So the only young people that... I'm a race person. I was raised, a race person is not a racist, but a person who is race-based in my perception, in my prison and my prism that I look out, I see race first. That's the first thing I see. I identify people by race. I identify your actions. First, I have to eliminate what you do as not being racial. Then I can deal with the rest of it. But that's going to be the first thing that pops up. Is it because I'm black or is it because you're white? Now, I don't have a choice. I grew up in segregated United States of America. I was there for the civil rights movement, mostly the Black Power movement, because I was not a civil rights person. I was a Stokely Carmichael, Black Power person. And so that's my prism.
You mean I have two radicals at the table today.
No question. But my kids, one daughter is not a race person. She's an artist. And the other one is what I always call Angela Davis parading as a Cosby kid, because she has such a wonderful personality and such an open demeanor, but she stone cold understands who she is, and she understands what is racial. But I taught her that, and I beat that in her head. But for her and her best friends are all United Nations. One is Jewish, one is Korean. I mean, you would think she was raised over there in the United Nations, but she's very, very black and has made people accept that about her. But for the most part, her generation is, I won't say colorblind, but they're not race people. They're just not.
It just doesn't matter to them.
It doesn't
the same
matter.
way it matters to us. I mean, they're
not mad. And
no,
I used to have a philosophy that if you're walking around, you believe that. And it's like I'm about to die and it's not happening anymore. But I used to say, if you're walking around this country and you are black and you're not mad, something is wrong with you. And I used to really believe that, and I still believe it, except that my experiences are not their experiences. They didn't have the experience I had. Yeah. They were never called nigger. Yeah. They didn't have to eat. Yeah. My mother didn't, driving down the South, they didn't have to go and we had to eat in the car. They didn't have those experiences.
Use the restroom. We used to have to use the restroom with coffee can.
Yeah, because they didn't have those experiences. So they don't have that orientation.
You know something, as a personal introspective observation, Nelson Mandela is, struggling right now. And when you talk about walking around with your fist balled up, I really did think, I certainly came through a period of time where unmistakably my fist was balled up and I was looking for somewhere to throw a brick. And I think as I got into my late 20s, early 30s, I thought I had gotten beyond that and started dealing in the business world and what have you, and wasn't really conscious of having those kinds of hostilities from some real racist experiences that I endured. It wasn't until being in South Africa in February and March of 1993 and spending 3 real days with Nelson Mandela and looking at a man.
We were together.
We were together. I know you know what I'm talking about. Looking at a man who had spent 27 years of his life, and he came and as he shared with us in very personal terms his experience and sort of shared his life, you saw someone legitimately without a trace of bitterness for what he had endured. And I'm telling you, while we were there, I felt something lift from me that was very heavy. I felt myself release something, having understood what he had endured, and whatever it was that I felt I had been a victim of, it didn't hold any candlelight to what he had experienced. And so by example, him having his lack of bitterness made me a better person. That's part of what Nelson Mandela, I think, represents to so many. I like to have you guys to talk about.
It freed you for one thing, because walking around with anger and bitterness,
especially when
you're so heavy.
Yeah.
And it just eats away at you. You just have to deal with people differently. You just have to.
Yeah.
If not, then you become a victim of your own bitterness and your own anger.
But we all admire Nelson Mandela for so many reasons, but especially for that lack of bitterness. And
Yeah.
for the amount of leadership that he provided in South Africa when apartheid basically was overturned. But at the same time, if you talk to black South Africans, the material conditions of the majority of African people has not changed in South Africa.
Yeah.
You have the group at the top who are educated, who are able to take advantage, for example, of affirmative action in terms of business dealings and things like that. But, you know, they still have, the last time I went there was in, did I go 2010 or 2011, to try to do some exchange work with the college. And you still saw the shanties.
Yes.
You still saw the Bantu stands.
Yeah.
You still saw so many things. There are not enough spaces for our young people to go to college. So Mandela's, you know, what usually happens, and you can see it in Atlanta as well, is the change of political conditions does not always lead to a change in economic conditions.
Economics, right.
And I don't want anybody to be bitter or angry, although I must confess I have anger issues. You know, it's why I don't kickbox anymore, because it's just tempting. But in any case, you don't want to have anger, but you want people to be focused on solutions, especially around the economics. Mandela was not able to do that for a number of reasons, mainly societal rigidity. But somehow Zuma also has not been able to do that. And we need to find, there needs to be a black leader in South Africa who's committed to closing the social and economic gaps, just like it would be lovely if we had an African-American president who certainly is everybody's president, but who's allowed our community to suffer relatively in terms of not looking at unemployment, which our unemployment rate still remains twice, not looking at the wealth gap and things like that. So I always want to connect the political to the economic.
But Mandela had to do what he did because he had to. His job was to keep it from becoming bloody.
Yeah, to keep a lid.
To keep a lid on it.
Yeah.
And you couldn't do everything.
Right.
But, you know, in that transition, there was a whole, you know, we were together in South Africa, and I had several experiences then and then later. We were there for the writing of the new constitution for South Africa. He had just been released, and we were there. And there were a whole lot of mad black people who had a lot of scores to settle. And so his job was to try to keep that from, you know, turning into another civil war. And once he was able to do that, and one of the reasons he was able to do it also, if you read some of his writings, was that he had connected with his jailers, and he had learned a lot about their mentality in the 27 years he was incarcerated. So that helped him also. He really had quite an experience. It was a road to Damascus experience that lasted 27 years. So he had that to do. He couldn't deal with all of it. But, you know, the conditions of South Africa and Africans in South Africa, I always tell people when they want to go to Africa, and I will tell you this if you've never been, I always advise people to go to Ghana first. I said, go there because the language is easy. It's our language meaning over here, English. And you can still see culture. What happened in South Africa is they destroyed a lot of the African culture. And so when you go to the townships, it's just poor black people in Western clothes and doing the same thing, shanties. You have to go way up into the bush to really see the culture of South Africa. And that was one of the problems of having apartheid so long. But again, Mandela, you give him credit for that.
No, he definitely deserves credit. I mean, he's an exceptional man, and I think he was an exceptional leader. But I also think that, you know, there is symbolism and then there are material conditions.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't take a thing away from my admiration for Nelson Mandela. But I'm also very frustrated about the pace of change and the extent to which, for example, when he came in, the value of the rand, the currency there, immediately went down. So that lets you know what some of the racism in the world was like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the people who lived there, you know, are still suffering. And it's easy to think that things are better because you see black people in the restaurants, you see black people, but that's the upper class.
And then they're with us all over the world, and they're doing the same thing, taking it from the poor.
Let me, that's international. Let's come back here. Who's going to be the next president of the United States?
Hillary Clinton.
Now, I know that you are a stalwart admirer. And
I'm not only an admirer, I'm a very good friend of hers.
Friend and supporter.
Yeah.
I was unclear. Do you think that the issues, well, what I would call much more trumped up issues Where they tried to bury her early was Benghazi.
It didn't work.
And, you know, you had the Benghazi, and, you know, I've been fascinated over the last several months about the use of the word scandal. Because it's been a blinking neon light, and there's really been nothing behind it.
Well, you know, the
whether
IRS
it was Benghazi or the IRS or the rest, and that IRS thing is really kind of flipping the script on them.
Because if you look at the Post had an editorial today, and they talked about the fact that not only did they so-called target the Tea Party, but they did the same thing with Occupy. So if anything said Occupy in it, they were looking at them more closely. Right. So it wasn't a left or right thing. It's organizations that had started recently to ensure that they were managing their taxpayer. They weren't looking at the NAACP. They were looking at the National Organization of Women. They were primarily looking at organizations that essentially had been basically put together in the last 10 years. So, but Michelle Bachmann goes on TV and says that President Obama should be impeached over the IRS thing. So you're right, scandal just gets, but you know, they should attack Hillary early, because then it's old news. Keep attacking her. But by the time we get to, you know, a couple more years, it's going to be old news.
And then you both have said very quickly Hillary Clinton's. So,
if she wants to be.
So, does she want to be?
Well, you know, I was with her a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking, and I said, I'm not going to ask you the question that everybody asks you. I will tell you this: I have a little gas left in my tank, and I'm saving it for you in case you do make that decision. And she said, stay tuned. And I said, okay. And she said, really stay tuned. And then I didn't know what that meant. I blew it off. The next day, literally the next day, they announced the launching of her Twitter. I was like, okay.
And over 1 million followers.
Okay, so you heard it first on the Rock Newman Show out of the mouth of Cora Barrett. Cora Barrett said Hillary Clinton is going to run for president in the next term. That's breaking news here from the Langston Hughes room at the Busboys and Poets. I'm going to repeat it. Cora Barrett said, you just heard her say Hillary Clinton said she was going to run for president.
No, that's not what she said. What she said was stay tuned.
Well, it must be these earphones here. That's what it sounded like to me.
Well, I believe she has the option. I believe she'll be the front runner. But again, she has the option. She may not want to do it. And if she isn't the person, I wouldn't know who would be. But I hope she runs. It's time. It's overtime. And she's one of the most talented politicians that we've seen in a while, with the kind of international experience that many do not have.
That would make for such extraordinary political theater.
Oh, we'll have so much fun.
Oh, it's going to be a whole lot of fun, because when you think about how the Republicans would come after her, and her record and her liberalism, her left liberalism, because my contention, we say here at the Rock Newman Show, our theme is we are one. The day we had Minister Farrakhan on, he made an interesting observation. He said, you know, yeah, we do come from that one source, but we don't behave as one. And my response was, part of what I wanted this platform to be was to try to get us all together and to make us live that concept, which is a reality, that we are one. But we're not there yet. And so, boy, and I don't think that on the other side of the aisle, they are politically mature enough yet not to make fools of themselves when Hillary throws her hat in the ring, like you said she said she was going to do.
Like the last election, if they had just chilled and was not so obsessed with Barack not winning and doing all this crazy stuff, they may have won.
Yeah.
Well, the 47,
they don't know how not to be crazy.
Yeah.
Well, that's
what I'm saying. Not mature.
But you know what a scary campaign would be is if Rubio on the Republican side were to face Hillary. Because basically you're then looking at a woman and a Latino. And then, I mean, President Obama had 72% of the Latino vote. Nobody can say any particular constituency totally elected him, although 97% of us voted. But 72% of Latinos, the other percentages escape me, but imagine you throw a Rubio out there. What do you think, Cora?
I think Rubio is the Latino version of Clarence Thomas. I don't think they'll all follow him.
I think she would absolutely crush him. And right now, unfortunately, we're being crushed by the clock. We've got to bring this phase of the Rock Newman Show, June 29th to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you very much to my guest, Dr. Malveaux, Cora Masters Barry. We'll see you on July the 13th. We won't be here next week, but on July the 13th, when we'll have breakfast with Mayor Vincent Gray and the one and only incomparable Nikki Giovanni. See you then on the 13th.
Welcome to the Rock Newman Show. It's the Rock Newman Show.